some of the things. Thank you for that. I'm going to have John list some of the things that I'm using in the chat. So that way, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, but also we'll address them and try and navigate to the right things. And feel free to ask questions as we move along. I can definitely move and talk at the same time. So John, if you'll switch over to the other camera view, I'll go ahead and start sharing. All right. So first, I want to show you some images that I've created. And this, of course, is the finished piece for the image that you're looking at. So this was the demo from the class we did last week. It's done on Ampersand art panel, and I'd used open acrylics with it, which are a slow drying acrylic. And it's just an expressive interpretation. And of course, you can see it's inverted, right? Because the gel plate flips things around. And then I also have this one from the following week that we did. This is just a different color scheme, just keeping it nice and subtle. I love all the hazy kind of dreamy mark making, but this had a fluorescent yellow background, and then it was printed on, and then I kind of wiped and scraped away some things, but it made the colors more vibrant because of that color underneath. And this was back when I first started playing with the process. This was a little one I did. This video is actually on the, if you do YouTube, you can do my name and gel place, and you'll see the video on how I did this landscape. You can follow along. But I didn't put background color with it. I just kind of wanted a soft, muted look for this. But this was back when I was first learning with it, but I did a little bit of black art pen on top just for mark making and squiggles, put a little bit of iridescent in there. You can kind of see it in the clouds, hopefully, that it kind of gives you that little bit of interest when you move the painting around. And then I started working around with portraits, and this was a monoprint process. So it had a fluorescent pink on the background. And then with monoprinting, I printed color by color. So I did my yellows, and then I went back and did some reds, and then I went back and did blue, and then I went back and did black. And so that was a little bit more in depth. It made it a little bit more crisp. And so you can take the subject matter, you know, wherever you want to go. But tonight I'm going to be doing a little bit of a landscape, and I'm using the same one that we did in our workshop. And what I've done is I've printed it full sheet. It's easiest for me, especially depending on how you feel about your computer, to just use full sheets because it's close enough to 8x10. And I use a gel plate that's 8x10. So that way, you know, I just print full sheet, and then I can take the gel plate. Now you can use any gel plate that you like, but it's kind of important that your gel plate be somewhat the same size as your image, because of the printing. So you have to format. If you do smaller, then you'll have to reduce your image, and so on and so forth. Sometimes I do 12x12, and I'll have to print on multiple sheets. There's a program called Rapid Resizer. It's rapidresizer.com, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but it allows you to upload your image, and it will automatically convert it to whatever dimensions you want to print it, and it will tell your printer how many pages to print it on to get it to equal that piece, if that makes sense. But with all that aside, I print it full sheet so that we can have full sheet. Now, another thing that you can do for fun is that you can always take something bigger, like this is a calendar, right? And I could take my gel plate and just put it over a small section and just study doing that if you have, you know, larger images that you're working with. It's not that you have to have it full crop. You just have to be real mindful about what you're doing. And the gel plates will stick to almost anything. So be cautious when you're doing that. Okay, now this was the original image. You can see the colors and how I embellished it. It wasn't anything special. It was just kind of a landscape picture that was taken on a trip. And I actually ran it through an app where I embellished the colors just to make it a little bit more colorful. The app was called Brushstroke. It's got a little picture of a bird as the icon, if you're interested in looking at that. But I just kind of got a color scheme that I was excited about. So what I've done is I've put the gel plate on top of the image, and this is what acts like the transparency, right? So I'm not drawing at all. I'm looking straight through the plate and just looking at what's there. So one method that I'm going to show you first is just taking one color and doing what's called just a monoprint pull. So I have a brayer. If you're not familiar with a brayer, it's a firm rubber brayer. This is a speedball brayer that I'm going to be using. And I like using the open acrylics. And the open acrylics are a product from Golden. They're a slow drying acrylic. And so you can get a lot of the effects that were once only achieved with oil paints. These stay open or wet for a few hours at a time. And so they're pretty amazing. They're great for plein air, but I love doing printmaking processes with them. And so I'm just taking one color, preferably a dark color. I've got Dioxazine purple here, and I just squirted it directly on the plate, and I'm just going to bray out onto my plate. Now you're probably like, how much paint is enough paint? Well, if you cannot see your image through the plate, then it's too much paint, because if you can't see the image, then you're not going to be able to do reduction. So what I'm noticing, and I kind of did it on purpose, is that I cannot see through to my image. So I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. And so all I have to do is I've got this little paper towel here that I've got to the side, and I'm just going to rub my brayer on there to discharge the extra paint. And then when I roll over again, it'll lift up more of the paint so that I can see through. So I just have to get that thin enough layer where I can actually see the image, or at least see somewhat of it. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do just this first time is just showing you a little bit easier method with just one color, but it gets these really cool effects. I really enjoy it, but it's called the subtractive method, and it's where I'll pull the paint off. And I'm just going to start by doing a little bit of brush work, and I'm just doing enough of this to get the point across so that you can see what's going on. But usually when I use my brush, I kind of outline things. Now I'm standing directly over my plate so that I can see, you know, where the outlines of the plants and stuff like that are. And when I'm using my brush work,
Mike, I think we've lost your audio.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. I think the battery for that died. So what I've done is I've taken the perimeter, and you can then take your paper towel, and I'm just going to wipe away the rest now that I've got my little mark. I don't know if y'all colored like that when you were in grade school, but I did. I had to draw the little safety line and then color away. I don't know if y'all work like that, but I'm just going to wipe away, but I'm leaving some of the residue so that I can keep some of the mark making. And I'm only interested in removing the light colored sections. So, you know, the lighter part of the grass, and the picture was just the skeleton, right? I mean, I just kind of used it to get the ball going, but it's not important to me that it looked just like the picture. It was just kind of the inspiration. Okay, and then I'm just going to remove some value from each section. I'm going to just dapple the trees just so that I've got a little bit of value happening there, softening some of the edges, but leaving some of them hard. I'll do the same thing down here. Okay, and all I'm interested in showing you with this is just the different effects. That's the main purpose of what we're doing here, is just showing you effects. So I'm taking just a standard sheet of copy paper. That's all that I'm really testing on right now. And I'm just going to make contact with the plate. Okay, and because the plate is soft, I'm just going to rub it, making contact, making sure that I get all the corners. All right, and I can pull it up. And you can see the interesting effects that are happening there with the gradient and the value and all the little smudges where I took complete paint off or where I took, extra paint with the paper towel. So it just gives you an idea. Now, because these acrylics are still slow drying, you can actually, continue to remove and move and manipulate the paint while it's still on the paper. If you wanted to, take some of that value down, although I really liked it, but you could still kind of move that around. You can actually wipe up and dig more. But of course, paper, isn't quite as sturdy as a substrate. So you may want to use something a little more substantial, and that's what I'm going to show you tonight. So when I'm cleaning my plate, the easiest way is I just keep some copy paper nearby. So I'll just put another mark down to make sure all the purple's off my plate. This is also called ghost printing. You haven't dealt with this before. And it's just the easiest way just to clean the excess paint off your plate. Now, before I get started on the process with that, I'm going to take something a little more firm. This is an Ampersand Gessobord. You can always tell because it's stamped on the back. And it's a firm, it's like a masonite, but they start with an art board, which is actually, it's archival seal, so it's museum quality. And it doesn't have any formaldehyde or chemicals in it. So some of the stuff like MDF and masonite, like what I'm working on here, they have chemicals that will eventually leach through your artwork, and over time they'll turn it yellow. And so I try to make sure that I don't cut corners and use stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stain this a particular color first. And I have a variety of fluorescent colors to choose from. I'm just going to try and pick something, exciting. And, in this first one, I used pink. And so I'm thinking for this next one, I'll use something kind of different. You see it, I just had a soft pink in the background. So if I'm going to do the same image, I want to do it differently this time. So I'm going to try and go with a little bit of this fluorescent yellow or chartreuse. All right, so this is a high flow. The high flow is just like a liquefied. It's like a high viscosity, highly pigmented acrylic. And I'm just going to put a little bit on the panel and just spread it out so that I can get a good background going. I'm just going to do it the easy way and take a paper towel and just smear it. So lovely bright color for the background. And I love having something exciting for it. And while that sits and dries, I'm just going to set it to the side here. And I'm going to go back to working on my image. But this time, instead of doing the subtractive method, now you certainly could do the subtractive method, but I'm actually going to just paint directly on the plate. And I'm going to start with the darks, just like I would with an acrylic or oil painting. I'm going to paint dark to light. And so before the other painting that I showed you, the one that I did last week, I used these three colors, basically what you would find in your copier, the magenta, the benzimidazole and yellow light, and a manganese blue. So basically your cyan, magenta, and yellow. So again, I want to do something kind of different because you've already seen the demo. So we want to create something a little more exciting this time. So I'm going to use still versions of primary, but this time I'm going to choose to use a Indian yellow, an ultramarine blue, which will be a subdued blue, and then a little bit of cad red light. And then, of course, I'll still use my titanium white, and I'll use a little bit of bone black for a dark. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to start with my darks, and I'm going to go in and add the black first. And this time, instead of using the brayer, I'm just going to put the paint on I'm going to put it on a little glass palette here. And that's what I'm going to use to paint with. And I'm just going to spread out these colors because I'm going to be using my brush form. And somebody was telling me that they enjoyed painting with oil paints. You can use the gel plate with the oil. You can also use cold wax medium on it. It's a little bit harder to clean. But when I'm cleaning my plate, I love using just like baby wipes that have, or you can use hand sanitizer, or you can spray it with rubbing alcohol. you can also clean it with water, but it just depends on how long the paint's been sitting on the plate. One reason that I enjoy the golden open acrylics so much is because they're slow drying. So I feel like they don't have time to dry completely on the plate. So it's easier to clean. If you were to just use standard acrylics on this, they would dry on the surface within 5 minutes. And so it'd be really hard to do this process without having a big cleanup job. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tilt this down so you don't get the glare, and I'll even move this up a little bit. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my dark starting out, and I'm using a silver silk silver brush. They have a little bit more buoyancy to them. They're soft enough. They don't damage the plate like a coarse hog hair bristle would, but they have enough springy buoyancy and they're resilient. So I find that they're my favorite brush so far to use with the plate just because the way they handle the surface. And I'm just going to start by feathering in my blacks. And again, there's no thinking about this. I see dark, I paint dark. Now you can go as expressive and off the rail as you want, blaze your own trail, you know, make it as free as you need it to be. But you could do, you know, portraits of grandkids, you could do vacation photos, you could do little still lifes, and the sky's the limit. But I'm just going to put my darks in there. And then I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm just going to go in with some of the blue and feather that in too. And I'm not blending the paint yet. I'm just kind of depositing it where I want it to be. I'm not blending the blue with the black or any of that. And I'm not oversaturating the plate with a lot of paint. I want it to be just the right amount. And you're probably like, well, what is the right amount? You'll have to learn that for yourself, but I don't want to cake it on there so much that when I stamp it down that it squishes and loses its shape. But I also don't want it to be so sparse that there's nothing showing beneath. But the cool thing is you don't have to get it right the first time, because when you print it, you can still work on top of the plate because the acrylics are still wet and the plate is still wet. So I'll show you how to do that. And that's another reason why I like it, because this whole sense of where to start or permanency is just kind of let go. You know, it's like no more scarcity thinking for me. All right, so I'm just touching some of these blue streaks in there. We'll get a little bit of our water stringing in there. Get a little black in the water. Now I'm being very streaky with the blue in the water because I want the color to be lighter and I want some of that stuff to show through. I'm going to do the same thing in the sky up here. I'm just going to kind of put a thin layer and just kind of scumble it in there. Just enough to get some blue down. I'll add another color in a moment. And I'm not going to be scared to let it touch my trees. Otherwise, I'll end up with what I call halos, you know, little bright circles surrounding everything. All right, and then I'm just going to feather this on some more. Clean my brush out. Okay, and now I'm going to go in with a little bit of my yellow. Now it's going to have a different look to it because this was a really bright chartreuse and this Indian yellow is not. So remember, I'm altering it on purpose because I wanted to get a different look than the one I already did. So I'm just, again, depositing. And I'm just going to speed it up a little bit. When in doubt, the sound effects always help. They literally do. I tell the students sometimes because they'll get in the zone and they'll start overworking and over manipulating their painting. And I'll say, make the sound effects, then it'll make you conscious of the fact of how fast your brush is moving or what you're doing. So. All right. Getting a little bit of color here. Notice I'm still not really blending anything yet. All right. Now I'm going to put just a little hint of the red in there. The red was just kind of like a little surprise. It's such a powerful color. I probably got way, way, way too much. But I'm going to put just a little bit here in the sky for the clouds. And I'm just going to put just a little hint around my focal point of those trees in the grass down here, because what grass doesn't have red? I remember the first painting teacher that ever told me grass had red in it. And I was like, I don't see any red. Show me the red. Oh, gotta love our journey, right? Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of white now and just brighten things up. And now I'm going to start blending my pieces. So I'm going to smudge a little bit of the white in the sky because it's the lightest value. But again, I don't want it to be too overdone. So I'm just putting, you know, some little streaks.
Micah, we have a question. How often can the plate be reused?
Forever. Eventually it will break down because it is organic material, but you can use it and use it and use it. I've had this one for all year so far, and I've done a lot of work on it so far. Now, you probably saw that it was stained a little bit blue because I used phthalo on it at one time. So it's kind of like a brand new paintbrush. It never goes back to crystal clear. You know, it always has a little bit of color stain on it, but you can keep using it and the color doesn't come off. It's not like when I print that it'll print blue. It just always has that kind of blue tint to it. So that's a good question. Thank you. When you store them, you always store them sideways, and I put them back in the clamshell, and I'll show you what that means in a minute so that you can consider that as well. All right, so as I add these white sections in, I'm also beginning to add a little bit of finessing to the colors, meaning that I'm just kind of tickling them together. So I might even grab a little bit more of the color, but now I'm starting to bleed my blue into my yellow, etc., and just dash it around. Just trying to cover any vacancies on the plate. And it's hard to tell, right? Because the image is underneath. So you're probably wondering like, gosh, where did I go? Did I already do this? And you know, you just won't know until you print, but that's the fun of it, is that you have time to readjust it after you print as well. I'm just putting a couple little highlights on the tips of these trees. All right, and then the final thing that I have to do is the mountains. I haven't done anything to those, so I'm just going to mix a little purplish color here, and I'm going to add some white for some atmospheric perspective. Get it a little bit more on the blue side, and then I'm just going to streak it in there. I don't really care. And I'm going to put a little bit there because I don't want it to end. Okay, does that feel good enough? That's what I'm going to do. All right, so now I'm going to print. And chances are I can already see some bare spots of the plate here. So let me just finger paint some in there. You can get all in it with your fingers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to print on the plate now. So notice the consistency. The image, the plate, and the panel are all the same size. So it doesn't matter what size you work on, as long as they're all the same size, or at least you can make it work. I mean, know the rules, break the rules, right? Now this is dry. I mean, I let it sit long enough, so it's got my bright color on it. So for registration means just how it all lines up. So what I'm doing is I'm actually holding my fingers to the side so that I can feel the edge of the plate so that I can get it as close as I can in proximity. Now this isn't going to be like the paper, because the paper, when I push down, I could squish and feel the plate, but now I can't because it's a rigid surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this tape up. The tape was just there to secure the image so that I can flip the image over and press from the back, because I want to feel the squish of the plate. And why is that important? Because it gets air bubbles on them. And if I was to lift this paper back now and show you, you could probably see some of the air bubbles that are in there, but I don't want to take it off because I don't want to lose registration of my image. So I'm just going to press it down, and I'm making sure that I'm pressing on the plate, pushing it into that rigid panel so that I can get all those air bubbles out. And then just moving my hand around. making sure that I've got contact with all of them. And then what I'm going to do is tilt it back up so that I can pull the plate off and just have my panel here. And you can see the colors really bright, and I didn't get a whole lot of saturation on it. Some of the stuff still got stuck on the plate, so it didn't make a full contact, but I have a beginning. So I can do two things. One thing I'm going to do is set this aside for a second, and then I'm going to come back with my plate, and I'm going to get the rest of it off. You could either put a whole nother panel down, but I'm going to use a piece of paper here. And I'm going to get the excess paint off and look at my ghost print. So now I have a ghost print that I could work with. And I love all those effects, the little places where the pullback came, or like the places in the sky where they have some of the water beads from the plate gelling up on it. So it's just really interesting. And you could, cut this out, make collage papers with it, etc. But now I'm going to come back to my image, and I can actually use the open acrylics and go back in to paint anything that I might have left off the first time. And so I'm going to be careful to leave some of those. What really needs to happen for me is mostly just the focal point needs some coverage so that I can begin to move this paint on the plate. And I'm just going to tickle little spaces because I want as much of the gel press effects to show up as possible. So I'm just dabbing impressionistically little modules on here so that I can get the dense part of the tree. And so I can just pull that together. I'm looking at my image. And the more I'm going to speed through this, the more that I cover or anchor some of those dark places, the whole image just kind of comes out. You didn't really even expect it. So I'm going to leave a lot of the brightness. I'm just starting in this area to saturate. You could really take this in an abstract, level and the more anchorage that I get, meaning that I'm just kind of blocking out those bright spaces, I'm going to keep all my saturated paint right there. And I'll come in with some yellow across here. Okay, now I'm going to quiet the sky down just a little bit. And the way that I'm going to do that, I know I've got a lot of my energy going there. I'm going to pull some of the white with the same colors that I had, some of the lighter purples. And again, I'm going to start by my tree and just start negative painting around the edges here. And it's more purple than I want it to be on purpose. I want to get a little colored halo going on, but I don't want it to overpower my mountains. And slowly I'll increase my proportions of white, moving outside it, leaving little peaks of my gel plate. And you can see that the white's mixing not only with the printed colors underneath, but the mixture that I had on the palette beforehand. And I don't want anything beyond here to be brighter than my focal point. So I'm going to put my brightest white right in between that tree, just to really call my attention to it. And because it'll stay wet for a minute, I'm just going to kind of land it there and keep working. Put a little bit of my sky holes in there. I'll take my purples and reds and just keep going over this way. Only quieting down the areas that I feel like are screaming a little bit too loud. Leaving as much of the effects there as I can. Soften that edge, soften some of this. Okay, see how it's just kind of forming together a little bit? I'll break this up. Do we have a lot of landscape painters here tonight? People enjoy landscapes? Kind of gets a Van Gogh look to it, right?
I'm learning to do the landscape on the iPad.
Oh, nice. Are you using Procreate?
Yes, I
Yeah.
teach it, and I was an abstract painter, but now I'm getting into the different branches because the customers are interested in the different sides.
Yeah, Procreate's becoming the new thing. All my young painters in my teen development program, they are doing Procreate at home for homework. They don't go home and paint, they go home and do the Procreate.
They're very wise.
Yeah. But I will tell you from an art therapy standpoint, there's something about getting your hands in it. And so
Yeah.
it's good.
I find I get as drawn into it as I did when I was doing paint.
Oh yeah, they're both good for different reasons, but
Right.
I like to have an equal proportion. I still got to get my hands in it. Thank you for bringing that up, though. That's a great point. It's an easy way to practice, and you can take it on the go with you. Okay, so I can keep fussing around with this to really pull in, but I want to show you a couple of other things with techniques. So the paint's still wet, right? I mean, it's going to stay wet for probably another 15, 20 minutes, especially depending on how thick it is. And you can just add all kinds of stuff. They have iridescence and they have some different molding colors that you can add. But if I want to scrape away, so let's say that I'll add a little bit more white up in the sky. And let's say that you're painting and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. Oh man, I overdid it. I'm covered up too much in my sky. What am I going to do now? So that's okay, right? Because that's part of the stress-free part of this is that you can't mess it up. So if you cover up too much and you want more of that yellow shining back, you can always take like a scrape away tool. This is just a little gel press, but then they've got these catalyst combs. You know, you can put some mark making in that, and you can just kind of go through the wet paint and put some interesting marks in there and just let the paint become something else. You know, maybe we'll put some streaks on the trees, or, you know, maybe we'll come down and do some of that in the grass. It's like you can just kind of blend the colors and play in that way. I just want to keep some of the interesting effects of the gel plate. That's the main thing. It's like not all or nothing. I mean, you're probably like, well, why do you even use the gel plate if you go back and paint on it or you go through and squish it up? Because it got me started and I didn't have to think about it. You know, that was the beauty of it, is that I could just put it down and go. And that's what a lot of people were telling me that they weren't able to do. And so it just kind of gets you out of that cognitive brain and lets you get into action. So I'm going to go back and brighten up my white a little bit. I love that streaky, but I want to put a little bit of something eye-catching in there too, just to pull me in for value. Eye-catching, as if that fluorescent chartreuse wasn't enough. But that's what I like about the interesting use of colors. Is I like having something kind of bright and bold, because it takes you to that kind of fantasy playland. Lets you think about a landscape that may or may not exist in your world. All right, and now I'm just going to anchor this a little bit more with some blue. I'm going to show you one more little thing with this. Okay, so now I can use either the back of my paintbrush, or I can use like one of the little scribing color shapers. I have this little thing. It's like not a needle tool. It's got a rounded end on it, but you can do that for some drawing as well. So if I want to really kind of contour where this grass is and how it's kind of spiky, I can go through and cut back down to the plate. And the more of this yellow that I had concealed, you know, the even brighter it would be. I didn't really spend time covering the whole plate like I would have, but you know, just enough to kind of get the idea, just for some extra mark making. Let me show you. So, and then I can do some more up here where it will be more apparent around the tree. So just have something a little bit more playful and wispy, but it's just so much interest. I mean, when I look at it, I'm really drawn to that energy. I love these little streaks here. I love this, you know, gelatinous kind of pull away from the mountains. I mean, it's just got a lot. If I continued working this, I would probably soften more of the chartreuse down throughout here so it's more solidified and anchored. But I love having the peaks of it come through there and there. I'd probably leave that, but I'd probably cover up some more of this. You kind of have a natural diagonal going on there. So I just keep unifying that. And I'll do it real quick while we got some time. How are we doing on time? Are we okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, I'm just going to darken this up a little bit. Have people used the gel press in any way before? Anybody have any experience with it, doing something different? Maybe some collage classes or something like that? Or is the gel press new to y'all?
I've only seen it and have practiced myself with making collage papers that were just general splashing around. You know, this is the first time I've ever seen it done using it for a landscape. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm on a lot of the things that I do with the gel press really incorporate a lot more of the, I don't want to call it fine art techniques, but you know, like I did a video last week where I did printmaking with it, and I did a linoleum cut, and I used the gel press to print on the backside of the linoleum cut so that I wouldn't have to use a press at all, but then I wouldn't have to press the paper straight into the linoleum. And that was pretty fun. And another thing about this that I forgot to mention to you is that the ampersand panels come in both cradled and non-cradled. Let me grab a cradled one. It's right here out of reach. So this is a cradling. This is a 3-pack here, but you see they have like a birch side to them so that you can hang them directly on the wall. So if you didn't even want to frame this, you could use the cradled panel. And I mean, like as soon as you print and you're done, it's done. You just hang it on the wall and it's good. Where a lot of people were used to doing this on paper, and then they would have to frame it and mat it and all that stuff. And so that's another thing I like about printing directly on the panels. I'll test some things out with paper, and then I'll go in and do the panels, you know, toward the end. I'm going to put a little bit of this red in here just to help accelerate some of that.
I have done the jelly plate using stencils with very inconsistent results. Is there any secret for doing that, like with acetate stencils?
Yeah. Well, if you, let's see if I have a stencil handy. If you put the stencil down first on the gel plate, and then you stencil over it, it sounds kind of hindsight, and then pull the stencil off and then print. That's where I've had the best effects with it when I'm using the stencil. It also depends on how much contact is going through with the brayer. A lot of times, if there's too much, if you're using a brayer, I don't know if you are or not, if you're using a brayer when you're doing this, the stenciling, but if there's too much paint on the brayer, it will actually squish the paint in between the stencil, and it won't leave a clean stencil. But then also sometimes people, when they're going over the stencil, they don't have enough paint on it, and it's not making contact depending on how thick the stencil is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And really, the open acrylic, I mean, I'm not like, you know, I'm a firm believer that you can use whatever you have. So you don't have to go buy any special stuff, but the open really does make a big difference because it stays wetter longer. So I'm not losing a lot of that tackiness when I'm trying to get something down. And so I tend to use them whenever I'm doing any kind of printmaking stuff, and it makes it a whole lot easier for me. But that was a good question. Thank you. There's a lot of videos. I put one video in the chat about cleaning your brushes, but I put out videos just about every week, just with random tips and stuff. And I've done a couple on cleaning your stencils and using them, and using a lot of the things with the gel plate. So, you know, if you like just little tidbits like that, you're welcome to search the name. And I just basically answer my students' questions, and then I'll record it and put it on YouTube. If they ask me something like, you know, how do you get all this, you know, crusted paint off a brush? I'll say, oh, okay, I'll show you how to, and then I just record it and put it on there. So, and if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and I'll dial a friend and get them to get the answer for me. I'm gonna put a little bit more white here just because I really want to draw in some focus back up here. I'm just checking out my.
At what point do you walk away, Micah?
You know, isn't that the magic question? I mean, isn't that always the magic question? For me, I just keep looking in this, I'm looking at it on camera, and every time I glance over, I just see something else. I'll tell you the strategy for what I'm doing is I'm trying to concentrate or solidify this and eliminate so much of the chartreuse, because I feel like if I can make it have greater volume, then it brings you in a little bit more. And so far, I think I've got it. The only thing I would just really probably quiet this down a little bit. And then this part would kind of be jumping. I'll probably put a little bit too much red there too. But artistically, that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for, is like, how can I quiet that red down like I just did, so that I can draw myself up into and around here. And then this yellow here is a little bit too loud. So I'm just going to fingerprint it just to quiet it down. And you see, now it's kind of got me in this area.
So there's really no difference in terms of determining the composition.
Yeah.
It has the same principles as any one of the art functions that we do.
Well, and I guess it just depends on where you're at in your journey too, because I've heard a lot of people say, you know, like, you know, you don't have to go so strictly by the rules and stuff. And I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I really didn't know until I printed it, you know, and that's the fun of it, is like, when I first pulled the plate off, even during this demo, I was like, "Ooh, that looks horrible," you know. But then I was like, "Well, I know that I'm going to paint on top of it, and that's part of the journey too." So I got to plug my computer in real quick. So part of the journey is being able to live with it and know that you can keep adjusting it and changing it, and then part of it is knowing, you know, like you said, when to stop. And sometimes when I just don't know what to do, that's when I walk away too, because I could sleep on it. Just FYI, I don't hang any art in my house. The only reason that this is up here now behind me is because they're getting ready to go to a show. But I collect other people's art, because if I have my own art on the wall, I'll want to pull it down 6 months later and fix something or change something, because I'm always seeing stuff. And especially when you're evolving and growing, you know, you look back at pieces. And, you know, every now and again, I'll have that magic piece that I still like it a year or 2 years later. But to me, that's the biggest thing, is just kind of playing around with it. But look at how free this was. You know, it's just, I mean, I really like it now, and I'm happy of the way it came out. And I'm like, okay, that was fun. But I also wasn't putting much thought or care into it either. It was okay if it didn't come out great, because I could also just, you know, paint over it and do something different.
Your stream has a marvelous life to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I just think all the mark making's there. And I love how it's like trying to be something, but it's not quite something. So it lets the viewer decide what they're seeing, you know, and I feel that there's a magic about that too. And then, of course, you can always take that same scriber and you can just sign your name that way. That's how I usually do it. I'm not really sure what I did with it now. Here it is. So, because the paint's still wet, right? So when I go in, I can just sign it like that. And you're good to go with a downside. And this will be dry in a couple of hours, and then I could just pop it into an open back frame. So I might mess around with it a little bit more, but I might not. But that's the gist of what I wanted to show you. And look at how, different the two are. Same image, and look at how different. Different colors, different playfulness. They came out in different outcomes. So
Amazingly different.
and that's the fun part too, is that you could play with the same image and do a whole series,
Sure.
and you could treat it, it's like a fun way to do color studies. It's like you could just mix up your own color combos just to see what happens. I mean, I really wasn't sure about that ultramarine Indian yellow red, but I like it. It came out good.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a surprise. Now,
How large of a jelly plate can you get?
the largest that they make for gel press, I believe, is 12 by 16, and I have that. I have talked to them this year about making an 11 by 14, so that, because once I started doing this process, we started having discussions about being able to frame them or print directly on panels. But, they didn't have any 11 by 14, but they have 5 by 7, they have 8 by 10.
Could you tape more than one together?
Well, I don't think I would tape them together, but I have pondered, because I thought about doing a 16 by 20, and I thought, well, I could lay them side by side. But I think what would happen, because they are organic, this is just a baby wipe, by the way, so I'm just wiping off. It makes it super easy, and I'll use the same thing to clean my brayer off. But what I was saying is it's kind of organic, so it's not like a super straight edge. So you could lay them side by side, but then it would print that seam, which I was thinking might be kind of interesting, because I was like, maybe you could make it like quilted. But Jelly Arts makes a 16 by 20 plate. I'm thinking it would be kind of difficult to store. That was my thing, because even with my bigger plates now, I have to store them in a different way. And
You could paint over the seam.
you could, and you could even, if you were printing with it, you can even manipulate the sides a little bit, So like if it was there, because I showed you on this that I could take a wet paintbrush to this right now and pull up any of these areas if I wanted to.
Right.
The paint's still wet. And that's the fun part. And I really want to do it, and I really don't want to do it, but I'll do it anyway, just to show you. So if I look down here, you see, I could just pull that paint up at any given time. And if I wet this brush even more, I could pull it all the way back to solid chartreuse bottom. You see? Just get it totally gleaming and clean. And that's the fun part. It's like you can just keep on, if this is too thick or you don't like this or whatever. I mean, you could just go back in and get to it. And I think that's pretty amazing in itself. So cleaning the plates, kind of a breeze. I'm going to cover that back up. As soon as you get it clean, you want to put it back into the clamshell, and I'll show you that too. This is what I keep calling the clamshell. This is the packaging that it came in. And basically I took this out and then just taped it to the front so that I could remember what size it was. And when it's clean, I'll just open it back up and just drop the plate in here. It comes embedded between two pieces of plastic, but I always throw those away. That's what they advise us to do. And so all I'm going to do is just flip it back in here like so, and then lift the paper up. So there it is. And the air bubbles are in there, and I always store it on the side to eliminate air bubbles as best as possible, because it is an organic material. So if you put it in here and it's wet, or you trap moisture in between it, it's gonna mildew. So you want to make sure that the plate's dry. And you see all the air bubbles, those could get trapped in there too. So when I close it, I'm going to tilt it upright and store it, sideways once I clamp it back together. And that'll keep it, in good shape as far as that goes. And, just making sure that my brushes are clean. I could put this paint in a paint container. I don't know if y'all keep like your little plastic boxes for oil, I could put it in there and reuse it and put a lid on it, because the open paint will stay good in this container for anywhere up to 2 weeks. So, you can't usually do that with acrylic paint. And another cool thing about the paints is that if I wanted to go back in, they have some iridescent. So this is like an iridescent bronze. And if I wanted to, just embellish some of that on the painting, just to make it fancy, I'll even put it in this section where I just kind of covered up a little bit. And you can just give it that little something extra just by putting a little metallic glaze on it. Yeah.
So Micah, for storage of the gel plate, how clean does it have to be? And it has to be dry, right, before you put it
Yes.
away?
So I just wipe it down. So honestly, I use like a spray bottle of rubbing alcohol most of the time. I mean, I had these wipes, so I use that, but either or. But the rubbing alcohol will dry it out. And so when I clean it and I do the rubbing alcohol and wipe it off with a paper towel, it's dry pretty much right after. It's not like I'm washing it or submerging it in water. But I do make sure that it's clean, but pretty much just what I did to it, it was dry when I put it back in the clamshell. Just making sure that you're not leaving like water beadlets on it, that kind of thing. That's really what you're trying to avoid. And then you can just store it sideways on any bookshelf. And they come in circles. They have little shapes. They have all kinds of different things that you can use with them. It's pretty nice. But yeah, that's a fun way of approaching it and just playing around. You can also use paint pens on it once it's dry. I've done that a few times. I told you about that. So I have these different size tips for black and white, and that's what I usually use. And you can go back in and edge and outline if
I love that orange in the middle that you scraped in. That really worked out nice.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Pat, did you have a question for Micah?
Well, it's a hardware question, and it can be done after everybody's done watching the painting. It's just about your equipment, Michael.
Okay.
Micah.
Yeah. Did y'all have any other questions about the painting in general? So with the monoprint process that I mentioned earlier, I had the picture of this individual underneath, but I only printed one color at a time. So I did the subtractive method, just like I showed you the first time with the purple. And I put the image down and I subtracted just what I wanted the white to be, and then I printed it. Then I put the yellow down and I took away just what I wanted to be yellow, and then printed it again. And then I did the red, and then I did the blue. And the darker I got, the more I wiped away. So for example, all of this was wiped away when I was printing the black because it only printed this. But you could see where I wiped away and left some of the red underneath her eye and left it around her eye. So I was only printing one color at a time. I didn't do it the same way that I did this, but the effects are still similar. And it was a fluorescent pink background, so you can see that streaking through. And I thought it was really cool. She just kind of looks like her aura is glowing. But
so Micah, did you just, like with this one, did you just use your hands to make sure that the registration stayed the same, or did you use some other equipment?
No, because the plates and the panels are the same size, I don't find that I'm having to use any of the equipment. And excuse me, and the plates, because they're slightly organic, I mean, I've used a variety of sizes, and there's just always a little bit of overlap. So if I get like a corner or something that didn't print, it did it a little bit here on the side, but it's not a big deal. But if there's a big gap or strip or something, I just take the brush and manipulate. But a lot of times it's framed anyway, so you don't really even see that. But when I'm hovering over, I'm making sure that I've got my fingers touching the edge, but then also touching the bottom of the plate. So my fingers are acting as the registration, and I do it at the top and the bottom to just kind of lay it on top like that. So I can feel the plate underneath before I actually drop it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Makes it easy.
Yeah, and if you don't have open acrylics at home, the easiest way, they have an open gel, and you can add that to any of your existing acrylics and turn them into opens. But you could just buy a couple of primary colors or even complementary colors and play around. You can get so much out of just a few things. I mean, you look at the print that we did here, this was the paper and it's dry now, but the only thing that I don't care for about printing on white is that there's so many perseverated white gaps. It's hard for the eye to land somewhere. That's why I usually block those out first, because I want to kind of create an anchor. But the sky's the limit with what you can do with them. Let's see if I can find the purple one. I don't know what happened to it, but it's just a variety of techniques that the more you do it, the more you play. And, the great thing is that you can turn all your mistakes into collage papers when you're working on the photo paper. So, yep.
Well, this was fantastic. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a good time with it. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. And if you all want to try something like this or use your own landscape image, we're going to be doing it next week at the same time online. And so it's a lot of fun. You can use clayboard also, which you can carve into. This was gesso board. Clayboard is the same surface. Everything's the same, but you can kind of scratch into it like scratch board. And so that has an extra layer. Another fun thing that we didn't really talk about, but you can still do, is you could actually do a collage layer in between. Like I made it chartreuse. Well, then I could have added some collage pieces down. Then I could have printed on top of it. And that way you would have little bits of paper and words.
Oh,
yeah.
So, you can really get as complex with it as you like. But yeah, it's just, the big thing is just to have fun and to pick something that's meeting you where you're at, and just to make it enjoyable, because when art's not fun, we don't want to do it. So
Well, Micah, thank you. Oh,
Yeah,
there's
sure.
a question.
Oh, the portrait you did is beautiful. Do you know that person?
Yeah, she's a high school friend. It's her daughter, and it was her senior picture. And so I was doing something during COVID for the seniors that didn't get, they didn't get prom, they didn't get this and that, they didn't get graduation. So every person that I graduated with in high school that had a senior that year, I did a free portrait for, a little 5x7.
Oh,
so I
nice.
did two of hers, because she was the first one that I was trying to do the process with, and the second one was better than that one, so I sent the second one and I kept that one as the sample. But yeah, I just wanted them to feel special, because there was so much taken away from them that year, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool just to have some unique fun gift to finish out your year?
Wow, that is nice. Well, thank you,
Wow.
Micah, for this demo.
You're a great teacher, Micah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, very good. Micah, I'm interested. John, if you want to turn off the recording, this is about
Yeah, let me turn off the recording and then you can.
Right.